Imagine two men, same city, same background, same starting salary, same year. No inheritance, no connections, no hidden advantage. One man worked his way into a stable position. Good company, decent benefits, comfortable enough that he stopped feeling the need to push. The other man stayed uncomfortable, not because life was cruel to him, but because he chose it. He took the smaller apartment so he could invest in skills. He kept the older car so he could keep building. He turned down the safer path every single time it appeared, not because he was reckless, but because he understood something the first man never did. 10 years later, the first man was still in the same industry. Different title maybe, a few pay raises, a life that, from the outside, looked reasonable. From the inside, looked exactly like the ceiling he quietly stopped fighting against. The second man had built something, not because he was smarter, not because he was luckier, because he understood one dangerous truth the first man never confronted. Comfort is not the reward at the end of the road. Comfort is the thing that quietly ends the road itself. And today, that's what we're talking about. Not generic warnings about laziness, not motivational noise about believing in yourself. I'm talking about the specific, mechanical ways that comfort operates on a human being over time. The ways it narrows your world so gradually that you stop noticing the walls have moved. The ways it redefines your identity quietly so that ambition starts to feel like immaturity and settling starts to feel like wisdom. Because the most dangerous thing about comfort is not what it takes from you. It's what it convinces you to give up voluntarily. Danger number one, comfort doesn't just stop you. It reverses you. Most people think comfort is neutral. Like a pause button, you get comfortable, you stop growing, but you maintain what you already built. That is not how this works. Your nervous system was designed for adaptation, not specifically for growth, but for adaptation. Whatever environment you exist in consistently, it calibrates to that as the new normal. Push against difficulty long enough, and the difficult becomes manageable. The manageable becomes routine. That's how human beings expand. But here's the part that should disturb you. The reverse is also true. When you stop pushing, your nervous system doesn't freeze at its current size. It starts contracting back toward what the new environment requires. The skills you stopped using begin to soften. The tolerance for discomfort you once built starts to fade. The challenges that were once fully inside your capability begin to feel ambitious again. And your comfort zone, which most people assume stays the same size, when you stop expanding it, actually shrinks. This is not motivational language. This is biology. A man who spent years building physical strength and then stopped training doesn't maintain the strength indefinitely. He loses it. The body responds to the current demands placed on it, not to the demands it once faced. The same principle operates in every dimension of a human life. Mental capacity, emotional resilience, business instincts, the ability to tolerate uncertainty without collapsing. Use them against resistance consistently, and they grow. Remove the resistance, and they do not simply hold their ground. They diminish. Machiavelli wrote that the prince who enjoys peace for too long becomes unfamiliar with the conditions of conflict. And when conflict arrives, as it always does, he is less equipped to respond to it than the man who never stopped preparing. The comfortable prince doesn't just face an external threat, he faces an internal one. The atrophy of the capacities that built the position in the first place. This is not a warning about war. It is a description of what happens inside a man who stops being challenged. Danger number two. Comfort rewrites your identity without asking permission. Here's something most people never examine closely. The story you tell yourself about who you are shapes what you believe is possible, which determines what you attempt, which determines what your life becomes. Identity is not abstract. It is operational. And comfort is one of the most effective identity editors that exists. A man who was once genuinely ambitious, who genuinely pushed against limits and felt alive doing it, does not usually wake up one morning and announce that he's given up. That's not how this happens. What happens is subtler, a series of small justifications, each one reasonable on its own. I'm at a stable point now. I've learned what actually matters. I don't need to prove anything. I'm more balanced. These phrases sound like wisdom. They feel like maturity. And sometimes they are. But comfort borrows the language of wisdom to excuse the behavior of retreat. And distinguishing between genuine growth in perspective and comfortable surrender dressed as perspective is one of the most important skills a man can develop. Because identity compounds over time. The man who tells himself he's past that phase of pushing hard doesn't usually make one decision and stay there. He makes that decision hundreds of times across hundreds of ordinary days. And with each repetition, the identity solidifies. The ambition that once felt natural starts to feel foreign. The discomfort that once felt productive starts to feel unnecessary. And eventually, the man who wanted to build something significant begins genuinely believing that what he has is what he wanted, not because it's true, because comfort edited the wanting itself. Machiavelli observed this in courts, in kingdoms, in the behavior of men who had once fought for what they built and then gradually forgot why fighting had been necessary. The identity of the builder quietly became the identity of the administrator, and administration, however skilled, does not build empires. It manages what builders created, and managing is comfortable. And comfortable is exactly where growth dies. Danger number 3. Comfort anesthetizes the signal you actually need. I want to be direct about something most conversations on this topic never address. Discomfort is not the enemy. Discomfort is information. It is the signal that tells you the gap between where you are and where you could be is still open. That there is still more of you available that hasn't been called upon yet. That the potential sitting underneath your current performance has not been fully accessed. Without that signal, you don't just stop growing. You stop knowing you need to. And that's the more dangerous condition. Years ago, a man I watched closely had built a moderately successful consulting practice. Comfortable income, loyal clients, no urgency to push further. For 3 years, nothing significant changed. He told himself he had found balance. Then a competitor entered his market with more aggressive positioning, and clients he assumed were loyal began making different decisions. And suddenly the signal was back. Not because anything new had become true about his situation, but because the comfort had been removed forcibly from the outside. The difference between men who evolve before circumstances force it, and men who evolve only when backed into a corner is usually this. One man kept the signal alive intentionally. He created artificial discomfort, took on challenges that weren't required, pursued growth that wasn't comfortable, not because his situation demanded it, but because he understood what happens to a man who stops being challenged by anything. He anesthetized the signal for convenience, and the signal stopped functioning. In chapter 25 of The Prince, Machiavelli wrote that fortune favors the bold, but the deeper point, the point most people miss, was that fortune does not remain patient indefinitely. The man who positions himself well during calm weather survives the storm. The man who used the calm weather to become comfortable has not protected himself from the storm. He has simply delayed his awareness of it. Danger number 4. Comfort makes the cost invisible until it becomes unpayable. Here is the number that most people refuse to sit with. Every year spent at a comfortable plateau is a year of compounding that did not happen, not just financially, though that matters, in every dimension that defines what a life actually is. The skill that could have been built, the relationship that could have been deepened through the pressure of shared challenge, the version of yourself that requires difficulty to become real and that therefore remains theoretical for another 12 months. These are not small things. These are the substance of what a life is made of. And comfort spends them without asking. Every day, without announcement, without a moment you can point to and say, that is when it happened. Just the slow, silent accumulation of days where nothing changed, and nothing changing felt fine, and fine compounded into a life that ended up smaller than the one that was once being built. Jim Rohn, who understood this more clearly than most, said that the biggest human temptation is to settle for too little, not to fail dramatically, not to collapse visibly, to settle, to accept a version of life that's comfortable enough that the urgency to want more quietly disappears. And once that urgency is gone, it does not usually return on its own. Something has to shake the system back to awareness. Sometimes that comes from the outside. Usually by then, the cost is already significant. Danger number 5. Comfort removes the obligation to become. This is the truth that cuts deepest. And I say it carefully because it is not a motivational statement. It is an observation about human psychology that deserves to be taken seriously. Most men deep down sense the gap between who they are and who they were becoming before comfort closed the distance. They feel it in the quiet moments. When they accidentally encounter someone they used to know who kept going. When they look at work they did years ago that somehow required more of them than what they're doing now. When they sit still long enough for the edited story to stop running and the unedited one to surface briefly. The gap doesn't usually feel like failure. It feels like something quieter. Like a version of yourself you outgrew without meaning to. Like a room you used to live in that you gradually stopped entering. Comfort doesn't kill ambition loudly. It simply stops making ambition feel necessary. And without necessity, without the productive discomfort that reminds you something is still unfinished, most men quietly stop finishing it. Machiavelli's deepest insight, the one that runs underneath all his political analysis, was this: men do not decline because they face enemies they cannot defeat. They decline because they stop requiring anything of themselves. The internal standard drops. The demands diminish. The challenges they once embraced become optional, then inconvenient, then forgotten. And the man who once required the best of himself gradually accepts whatever the comfortable version of himself produces. That is not a story about weakness. That is a story about a design flaw in human nature that every serious person has to decide to work against deliberately. Because the default setting, if you do not fight it, is always toward comfort, always toward less friction, always toward the path that demands the least. And the path that demands the least produces the least, not always immediately, but eventually, always eventually, the question you cannot answer comfortably. So step back from everything we've covered: the biology, the identity, the signal, the cost, the obligation, and ask yourself the question that most people spend their entire lives carefully avoiding. Not, am I happy right now? Comfort is quite good at producing the feeling of happiness, at least temporarily. The real question is simpler and more dangerous. Am I still becoming? Not becoming someone else, not becoming someone impressive to other people. Am I still becoming the version of myself that the ambition I once had was actually reaching toward? Is there still movement happening in the direction of something that matters, or has the movement stopped and been replaced by the management of what the movement once produced? Because here's the uncomfortable truth most people never say out loud: the things you refuse to build while comfort allows you to avoid them will eventually force themselves into necessity anyway. Reality does not negotiate indefinitely with avoidance. It simply waits. And when it finally delivers its accounting, it delivers it with interest. Every year of comfortable avoidance compounds the cost of the reckoning. The men who rise consistently, not because circumstances were kind to them, but because they built something that lasted, are almost never the men who found comfort and stayed in it. They are the men who recognized comfort for what it is, a signal that the challenge they're facing is no longer large enough. And then they found a larger one. If this video placed something uncomfortable in your thinking, do not let comfort dissolve it before morning. Because what you've heard here is only the surface of what this channel covers. There are deeper layers to psychology, discipline, and power that simply cannot be explored fully in one video. Not because they don't exist, but because most people aren't ready to hear them. That's why most stay average. If you're not one of them, subscribe. Because every video on this channel is designed to sharpen your thinking, challenge your assumptions, and separate you from the crowd. No fluff, no noise, just strategy. Most people will watch this and return to their comfortable routine by tonight. A few will not.